right, in Iraq, we're following a new threat from ISIS. ISIS fighters have come within 9 miles of U.S. troops stationed at a major Iraqi base, and they've almost completely taken over a nearby city. Separately, a key Sunni tribal leader is raising the alarm over ISIS advances. He says that if Iraqi troops pull out, Anbar province would, quote, fall within hours. This comes as President Obama is asking Congress for war powers to fight ISIS. Joining me right now, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer. He's a retired U.S. Army officer and intelligence officer. And Lieutenant Colonel James Reese, he's a CNN global affairs analyst. And Nick Burns, a professor at the Harvard Kennedy School, former U.S. Undersecretary for Political Affairs. All right, good to see all of you gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, so Colonel Shaffer, to you first, what are these war powers going to do that is different, which is already in place, different from what is already in place?
From what the president's asked for, from looking at the language, is really nothing extraordinary or different. Essentially, he's talking about formalizing the authority he's already been executing. And some of this has to do with budget. They've been using something called the Overseas Contingency Fund, the OCO. It's a slush fund the Pentagon has. Frankly, he could have used that to next year because there's $50 billion in that. So I think this is more of a debate point. And members of both sides of Congress, both parties, my friend Jim McGovern and my friend Walter Jones, Democrat Republican, have both been calling for this. And I think it's long overdue. So I think what this does is it puts it into the debate format, which it should have been really since last summer, and again starts to formalize the process, as well as stipulate some level of I think, self-restraint regarding the left and right limits of what he wants to do.
So, Colonel Reese, is this, kind of a prelude to a new strategy in the wings?
No, Fred, I think the president's just trying to get his ducks in order here. It's a new type of, the enemy that we're fighting now in ISIS. It kind of gets us, it moves us past 9/11. It moves us past the old Iraq. It allows him to get his, what he wants to do, his policies in place. But it also, also gets Congress now involved, which Congress has been asking for several years.
And so, Ambassador Hill, does this underscore that there is only a military solution here, that diplomacy, is out the window as it pertains to helping to offer better support, more support to Iraq, or trying to encourage coalition forces to take a different approach?
No, not at all. But I do think this is necessary, this authorization. The authorization the president is currently working under is from September 11, 2001. This authorization is important because it hopefully will get the president, the Congress, and the American people on the same page. It should identify ISIS as the enemy, but in my view, it should leave the military and the president some flexibility. I wouldn't want to see a resolution that limits the president to 1 to 2 years of military operations, or that limits the way he can conduct ground forces, because we should want this resolution to intimidate ISIS, not to reassure it. But wrapped around the military effort, obviously, is diplomacy to try to isolate ISIS internationally, to try to dry up its financing, and very important, it's to try to get the Sunni Arab states to be the ground force here, the Iraqi army, the Peshmerga, and the Syrian moderate rebels, and we get them together in a coalition. So this is a diplomatic strategy as well as a military strategy.
So I wonder, Colonel Shaffer, if there is this overall sentiment that the Iraqi forces can't stand alone, and even though Peshmergas are making, I guess, more of a dent, more of a concerted effort or organized effort than Iraqi forces, isn't there a feeling that no matter what, there's going to have to be this coalition support, if not U.S. support, because it doesn't sound like anybody sees that Iraqi forces can stand up on their own 2 feet. I don't know if it's an issue of the technology, the armor isn't there, or the willingness is not there.
Well, it's complex, and I agree with Ambassador Burns. You've got to look at this as a two-phased effort. First off, yeah, they can't do it on their own. We know that. The Peshmerga, God bless them, have done well with pretty much on their own. Kobani is a tribute to their do whatever it takes-ness, if you will. we've put forward, the London Center for Policy Research I belong to, put forward the very policy recommendation, strategy recommendation of bringing together the Sunni, the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Saudis, to get together and put together a NATO-type organization, a ground force, if you will, to go and do this. And then, as Ambassador Burns stipulated, you've got to have a civil plan to come into that, because once you retake the territory, you've got to put good governance in, because lack of governance, and those tribes, those Sunni tribes who felt they were essentially being shortchanged by Maliki, President Maliki, who was essentially a Shia leader, really stimulated the whole ISIS move. So we've got to do both. We've got to do ground forces, we've got to take back the terrain, and then bring in some level of civil diplomatic solution that'll take a long-term path towards fixing and stabilizing the region.
Okay, and gentlemen, if I could ask you all to kind of shift gears with me, and let's talk about Denmark and what's taken place, and now the ongoing investigation looking for these alleged gunmen who may be heavily armed, machine guns, pistols, who appear to have dumped their getaway car near a couple of subway stations. Yes, cameras will be a great tool, but I'm wondering to you first, Ambassador Burns, what is your greatest concern about what's transpiring here and how it is Denmark now at the centerpiece of what many are calling an act of terror?
Well, it certainly looks like an act of terrorism, and this attack was reprehensible, and hopefully the Danish police and the international authorities helping them will be able to isolate these terrorists and apprehend them. The concern here, of course, is following the January 7th attacks in Paris, following the breakup of One Ring in Brussels, you're really looking at a pan-European threat, a threat in many different European countries that have large Muslim populations of terror cells. And that threat has got to be fought not just by military means, but by intelligence, obviously, by judicial cooperation, by economic and political cooperation. So just as we were talking about ISIS, the way to combat terrorism is with a comprehensive military and diplomatic strategy. It's going to have to be short-term, and it's going to have to be long-term to look at how these young people get radicalized and try to take steps to prevent that from happening in the future. Okay,
and Colonel Shaffer?
Oh, I agree. There's a network that now exists, we know, in Europe. We believe the intelligence I've been told about really looks like it's linked to Yemen and the Al-Qaeda and the Arabian Peninsula. So I think we have to understand that this is a global approach, and we must do both. We must be very severe in our application of special operations forces, and then using clandestine human intelligence, interrogations, not torture, but interrogations, to figure out a way to walk back to map the network and defeat it. We will find out soon, I believe, if this attack today was linked to the same network that conducted the attacks in Paris. But we've got to take this seriously. Right here in Washington, I don't want to reveal security measures, but every news organization is now taking seriously the threat of ISIS or Al-Qaeda doing something here. So it's a very serious threat.
And Colonel Reese, last word on this?
Yeah, Fred, here's the bottom line, is right now the Islamic extremism, whether it's coming from ISIS or Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, we have to figure it out. The intelligence folks are going to figure it out. We're going to backtrack it, like Tony said, and we have to start working it. One of the things we're not doing very good, though, is countering their propaganda and bringing this recruiting base. So that's something we've got to take a hard look at.
All right, Colonels Tony Shaffer, James Reese, and Ambassador Nick Burns, thanks to all of you. And I think, Ambassador Burns, I think I may have referred to you to your colleague, Chris Hill, earlier. So my apologies on that, but I know you all are friends, so it's okay.
No problem.
All right, thanks so much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and tomorrow, former Secretary of Defense and CIA Director Leon Panetta is on State of the Union at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, hosted by CNN senior White House correspondent Jim Acosta. We'll have much more after this.